Have you ever trusted someone so much that you ignored all the danger signs? Have you ever opened the doors to your home, to your heart, only to be betrayed so coldly it felt like a scene from a movie? Well, that's how it was for me. A push, a fall that hurt more in my soul than in my bones, and the cruel smile of someone who was supposed to love me. They called me dramatic. They told me it was all in my head, that I, too old, no longer knew how to tell truth from imagination. Meanwhile, evil ran rampant under my own roof, and every stolen object, every manipulated word, was another piece of my dignity ripped away. But life has a curious way of turning things around when you decide not to remain silent. Sometimes, it's in our moments of greatest weakness that we find strength we never knew we had. That's how I turned pain into a strategy. That's how I went from victim to protagonist. This story isn't just about family betrayal. It's about clever revenge. It's about winning back what they tried to take from me. It's about showing that old age isn't synonymous with weakness, but with wisdom. So, prepare to embark on a journey of quiet courage, delayed justice, and unexpected twists and turns. I'll tell you how a grandmother, considered defeated, destroyed the future her family dreamed of at the cost of her own pain. And in the end, you'll understand that some falls are just the impetus for us to get back up even stronger. Want to know how it all began? The sound of the porcelain vase shattering on the floor echoed like an omen. It was more than just a broken object. It was the memory of 5 generations, reduced to shards by the feet of a grandson who looked at me with that half-smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Oops," he said, without a hint of remorse. In that instant, I knew something was wrong. That the child's innocence hid a wickedness no one wanted to see. Jason was only 10 years old, but he had a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. It wasn't just childish mischief. It was as if he took pleasure in seeing the pain reflected on my face. I, a grandmother who had always been patient and loving, was now the target of a cruel game. Daniel, my son, remained glued to his phone. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, pretended not to see. "It's just a vase, Mom," he said, as if my entire story were disposable. During dinner, I tried to broach the subject. My voice trembled, but my heart screamed for justice. "Jason needs boundaries. He's been hurting the neighborhood animals. This isn't normal." But Vanessa just set down her wineglass with practiced calm. "Boys will be boys, Ellie." Daniel, ever the cowardly peacemaker, simply said, "Let's enjoy dinner." And I swallowed my indignation like someone swallowing poison, feeling each drop erode my hope. Later, as I carried my tea tray upstairs, the house felt colder than ever. That Victorian staircase, witness to so many happy memories, was now just a narrow path to fear. It was then that Jason emerged from the shadows. "No one believes you anyway," he whispered, his eyes shining like someone much older than he actually was. Before I could react, I felt the push. The world spun in slow motion. The tray flew from my hands. My body met each step with a painful impact. A sharp crack announced the broken bone in my wrist. The physical pain was brutal, but the pain in my soul, it tore me apart. I heard my son running, shouting my name, but in his eyes I saw not concern, but exasperation. And around the corner of the hallway, Jason peered out, with that same wicked smile. At the hospital, I was treated like a confused old woman. Daniel and Vanessa told their story with the confidence of someone who knows a lie. "She tripped," they said. "Accidents happen at her age." No one wanted to hear my story. No one believed me when I said, crying, that Jason had pushed me on purpose. I was no longer the respected woman I'd always been. To them, I was just a nuisance, an inconvenient old woman. That night, alone in my room, my arm in a cast, I realized something much bigger was going on. The way they looked at each other, the whispered conversations that stopped when I arrived. It all made sense. I wasn't just being disrespected. I was an obstacle, a piece that needed to be removed so they could have what they wanted. The house, the money, my dignity. It was there in that cold bed that a seed of courage began to germinate. Because the truth is, strength doesn't always come from the muscles. Sometimes it comes from the heart, fueled by injustice. In that moment, a silent decision formed within me. They thought I was defeated. that the fall had finished me. Little did they know they were simply giving me the motivation I needed to get back up in a way they never expected. The following days were a silent parade of small cruelties. Jason seemed to delight in breaking valuable objects, always choosing those that held the most meaning for me. The antique silver picture frame, a gift from my late husband, mysteriously fell from the shelf. My diary, where I'd kept decades of memories, was scribbled over with colored pens, and with each new loss, he gave me a look that mixed defiance and satisfaction, as if certain he'd never be punished. Daniel remained oblivious, or perhaps he pretended not to see. It was easier to believe his mother was exaggerating than to admit that something was terribly wrong with her own son. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed to derive a certain pleasure from my anguish. She always had a ready answer to justify the unjustifiable. "Ellie, you're getting too sensitive. He's just a child. He doesn't know what he's doing." But I knew. Deep down, she knew too. It was then that my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, discreetly approached me. With tears in her eyes, she told me she'd seen Jason throwing rocks at her cat. "You need to do something before it's too late," she pleaded. I tried to talk to Daniel and Vanessa again. Once again, I was silenced. "That old woman is going blind," Vanessa laughed. "Maybe you should stop listening to gossip from people who have nothing better to do." The humiliation burned like fire. The atmosphere inside the house became suffocating. I paced the rooms with a knot in my stomach, feeling like every corner of my own home no longer belonged to me. At night, I heard muffled laughter coming from upstairs, laughter that carried an almost cruel tone. Jason had become a petty tyrant, and Daniel and Vanessa the perfect accomplices, masquerading as concerned parents. Increasingly, I began to notice subtle signs of manipulation. My medications were out of place. My most intimate possessions appeared displaced, as if someone wanted to make me doubt my own memory. Family photos were rearranged. It was such a well-calculated game of gaslighting that for a moment I even doubted myself. But my instincts screamed that it was no coincidence. The conversations at the table became cold and mechanical. Vanessa talked about the rising real estate market with a greedy glint in her eyes, while Daniel listened, silent but without disagreement. "A house this size for just one person. It doesn't make sense," she blurted, almost as if planting an idea. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was like hearing a plan spoken in code, and I realized I was the piece that needed to be removed for them to complete it. I began noticing pamphlets for nursing homes strategically placed on the kitchen table. When I mentioned them, Vanessa feigned surprise. "You must have put them there without realizing it, Ellie. Are you forgetting things again?" Anger rose, but I swallowed it hard, because I already knew any reaction would be used against me as further proof of my supposed fragility. On the outside, I remained calm, but inside, something was shifting. Every venomous word, every mocking look, every muffled laugh was like a spark, and, spark by spark, a silent fire began to grow within me. They had no idea, but each cruel act was fuel for something that would soon become impossible to extinguish. That night, I felt something hovering in the air. The silence in the house was strange, heavy, as if waiting for some inevitable event. I carried the old tea tray up the stairs with the care my arthritis still allowed me. Each step was a reminder of how time had marked my body, but also of the resilience I still possessed. Then, out of nowhere, Jason appeared in front of me, stepping out of the shadows of the hallway. His gaze was cold, almost sickly. He came close enough for me to feel his breath. "No one believes you anyway," he whispered, his voice low and sharp. Before I could react, I felt the push. It was quick, decisive, too strong to be a simple accident. In that instant, the world turned upside down. The tray flew from my hands, and I was gripped by the merciless gravity. The stairs felt like blades against my body. Each impact was a shock that knocked the wind out of me, taking away any chance I had to scream. The dry crack of my wrist bone echoed through the house. A sharp, excruciating pain shot up my arm and spread like wildfire. But worse than the physical pain was the feeling of helplessness. I, who had always been so strong, was now vulnerable, slumped like a broken doll. I heard hurried footsteps. Daniel came running, followed by Vanessa, both with expressions that weren't genuine concern, but rather annoyance. "Mom, what happened?" he asked, his voice more exasperated than distressed. Before I could speak, Vanessa added in that false tone of someone who already knows the answer. "You tripped, didn't you? These steps are treacherous for someone your age." "He pushed me," I managed to say through tears and pain. "Jason, he pushed me." But no one believed him. Daniel looked away as if he wanted it to be over. Vanessa rolled her eyes theatrically. "Ellie, please, you're being dramatic. Jason said you just lost your balance. Accidents happen, especially in your condition." And, at the corner of the hallway, there he was, Jason, with that same disturbing smile, watching the scene as if it were just a show. At the hospital, I was treated like just another confused elderly woman, the victim of some random mishap. As they put the cast on my arm, I could see Daniel and Vanessa whispering across the room. It wasn't concern, it was calculation. A quick glance between them spoke volumes. Then I realized it wasn't just neglect. It was a plan. I was just a piece that needed to be moved out of the way. When we returned home, the atmosphere felt even more oppressive. Vanessa offered to help me up the stairs, but there was an almost mocking tone in her voice. "You should consider living somewhere safer, Ellie. Maybe a nursing home? It would be better for everyone." Daniel just nodded, not daring to look me in the eye. The message was clear. I was a burden. That night, lying in bed with my arm in a cast, I realized something inside me had broken along with the bone. But at the same time, something new was being born. The fall had shown me who they really were, and if they thought I would give in easily, they were about to discover that sometimes a woman's strength is far greater than any fall she can suffer. The days after the fall were shrouded in an uncomfortable silence. On the surface, they feigned concern. Vanessa brought me tea. Daniel asked if I needed anything. But there was something in their eyes, something that betrayed impatience, not affection. I began to notice small details I'd previously ignored. My diary was no longer in place. My jewelry box, always closed, now appeared ajar. It was as if they were rummaging through every piece of my life without even bothering to hide it. One morning when I woke up, I noticed my photos had been rearranged. They looked the same, but they were out of order, as if someone had messed with them. My medications, which I always kept lined up on my dresser, had been moved around. It was a subtle but calculated psychological game. Little by little, I realized, it wasn't carelessness. They were trying to make me doubt my own sanity. A meticulous, cruel gaslighting that only reinforced how easy a target I was seen as. One day, while eating breakfast, I saw a pamphlet for a nursing home on the table. "A modern and safe place for seniors," the headline read. When I asked, Vanessa feigned surprise. "You must have put it there and forgotten. You're getting confused, Ellie." The way she said it, with that condescending smile, was like a punch. It confirmed that I was no longer seen as the master of my own life. Their nighttime conversations became even more revealing. I could hear them through the crack in the door. Vanessa spoke with cold calm. "If she falls again, no one will doubt it. We can anticipate everything." Daniel sighed, always more weak than malicious. "But what if she resists?" And she, impassive. "She won't resist. She's already old. Hospitalization is the best thing for everyone." Each word was a silent stab, but also a warning. It was at that moment that I realized I needed help. I called Beatrice, my oldest friend, the one who had always been like a sister. I told her everything, every detail. Her firm voice was like a hug that gave me breath. "They won't win, Ellie. We'll turn this around." The next day, she appeared with a determined look in her eyes and a bag full of seemingly harmless items. An antique clock, a picture frame, a figurine. "Cameras," she whispered, "will record everything." We installed the small devices in strategic locations. The clock was in the living room, the picture frame in the kitchen, the statuette in the hallway. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Now, if they dared to touch my things again, there would be proof. And I knew it would come, because that cruelty knew no restraint. The next morning, when we reviewed the first recordings, my heart nearly stopped. Jason, with silent footsteps, entered my room. He opened my jewelry box, took out a pair of earrings Richard had given me, and, as if they were a trophy, carried them to Vanessa in the kitchen. She looked at them, examined them, and said, "Good job, honey. These are worth at least 1,000. And the worst part was his tone, calm, almost affectionate, as if he were rewarding good behavior. There, faced with that proof, something changed in me. The pain gave way to a cold calm. There was no more doubt. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't my own exaggeration. They were conspiring together. And now, I had what I needed to begin hatching my plan. After seeing those images, something inside me ignited. It wasn't just indignation anymore. It was determination. I couldn't continue being the passive victim of a story they were writing at my expense. I took a deep breath and decided that if they wanted to treat me as weak, I would use that perception against them. Pretense would be my greatest weapon. Beatrice, always by my side, introduced me to George, an experienced elder abuse attorney. When I told my story, he listened with attentive calm. "This is more common than you think," he said. "But the advantage is that you already have evidence. Now we need a strategy." And it was there, in that office surrounded by law books, that the first draft of my counterattack took shape. Martha, a woman with a commanding bearing who led a support group for victims of family abuse, also entered my life at this time. She taught me something valuable. Be what they expect you to be, so they let their guard down. Let them believe they're winning. That phrase became my mantra. I would begin to show myself more forgetful, more dependent, more fragile. And in the meantime, I built my path to freedom. Over the next few days, I began acting confused. I'd purposely forget the day of the week. I'd ask the same question twice. I'd misplace objects and feign surprise when I found them. Daniel and Vanessa, convinced my condition was worsening, relaxed. And the more they relaxed, the more they revealed their true selves. Meanwhile, George handled every legal detail. He reorganized my documents, secured my assets, and began preparing moves no one there expected. One of the key points was Jason's college fund, over $300,000, which by law I was solely responsible for managing. They were counting on this money, and that was precisely why it would become the key piece of my plan. I also reorganized my most valuable possessions. With Beatrice and Martha's help, I discreetly removed everything of sentimental or financial value from the house and stored it in a safe place. When Jason went through my things again, he would find only what I wanted him to find. It was almost like a game of chess, and I was finally taking the lead. Vanessa, overconfident, began pressuring me to sign documents. "It's just to make your life easier, Ellie," she'd say, pushing papers toward me to transfer authority to Daniel. I'd smile and respond softly, "Sure, honey, I'll look into it later." They believed. They thought they were one step away from achieving everything. Little did they know the ground was already being prepared to crumble beneath their feet. On the outside, I remained the sweet, forgetful, and fragile grandmother. On the inside, I became the strategist they never imagined I could be. And while they counted the days to eliminate me from their own home, I counted the hours to turn the tables in a way that would forever mark our stories. The time had come to take the first step. With George by my side, I created the Second Chances Foundation, a foundation dedicated to helping victims of bullying and elderly people who had suffered from family abandonment. Everything was done legally, discreetly, and irrevocably. In just a few signatures, Jason's long-awaited college fund went from being a guarantee of their dream future to an investment in the future of truly deserving individuals. That same day, I purposely left a fake bank statement on my desk, suggesting a large withdrawal to an unknown account. As I'd imagined, Vanessa was the first to discover the paper. When I arrived in the kitchen, she and Daniel were arguing in whispers. "She took the money! She's hiding it from us!" she said furiously. He, visibly distressed, tried to calm her down, but his desperation was clear. The next morning, the expected approach came. "Mom, we've noticed some strange activity in your account. Don't you want me to handle the finances for you? It's safer." I almost wanted to laugh at her audacity. I feigned confusion. "Oh, honey, I must have messed up. I don't even remember. Vanessa hurried to add, It's normal, Ellie. Age brings these lapses. Let Daniel help. I simply nodded, as if surrendered, while inwardly I celebrated yet another confirmation that they'd fallen into the trap. With the stage set, the second part of the plan began. George drafted an official letter stating that any attempt to access my belongings without authorization would be reported to the authorities. Meanwhile, the hidden cameras continued to record every suspicious movement, and it wasn't long before more evidence emerged. Jason, in the early hours of the morning, rummaging through my drawers. Vanessa examining my jewelry with an appraising eye. Daniel talking on the phone about speeding up the plans. It was then that I decided to drop the first bombshell. Over breakfast, I casually said, "Oh, I remembered. I transferred Jason's fund to a very special foundation. It's going to help young people who have been bullied and seniors like me." The silence that fell was almost palpable. Vanessa paused with her cup in midair, her eyes wide. Daniel went pale. Jason, not fully understanding, looked from one to the other. "What do you mean? Foundation?" Vanessa almost screamed. "That money was for Jason's college." I kept my voice calm, almost sweet. "It was an educational fund, but now it will benefit many students, not just one." I thought it would be fairer. Jason, finally understanding, exploded. "You ruined everything, you stupid old woman." And it was in that instant that I saw, in each of their eyes, fear beginning to replace arrogance. After that day, everything fell apart for them. Vanessa, consumed by rage, could no longer maintain her facade. Daniel, under pressure, showed his fragile and cowardly side, trying to convince me to undo the act. But there was no going back. The money was legally protected. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, knowing the first step toward my freedom had been taken. The turning point wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It was the moment I stopped feeling like a prisoner in my own house and became the master of the board. They thought they were about to defeat me. But now it was their turn to experience the downfall. After the revelation about the college fund, Vanessa's mask fell completely. She paced the house like a caged beast, knocking things over and shouting accusations. Daniel, previously so passive, was now torn between fear for his wife and the shame of facing his own guilt. Jason, out of control, began destroying everything in sight, as if he wanted to take out on me his frustration at having lost what he thought was rightfully his. It was then that George sent the second official letter, a formal notice to vacate the house within 60 days or risk prosecution for financial and psychological abuse. In the same envelope, he enclosed security camera footage showing the theft of the jewelry, the tampering with my medication, and even the moment Jason confessed to pushing me down the stairs. This was no longer just suspicion. It was evidence, and hard evidence. Panic set in. Vanessa despaired when she realized the situation might reach the authorities. Daniel, trying to save his own skin, began distancing himself from his wife's actions, claiming he knew nothing. But it was too late. News of the lawsuit and the accusations spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had always been suspicious of their behavior were now speaking out. Vanessa's reputation as a real estate agent plummeted. Clients canceled contracts. Partners broke off deals. Daniel received a notice from his company informing him that he would be investigated for misusing my intellectual property in corporate projects. And Jason, well, the school finally learned about his behavior. He was forced to undergo a psychological evaluation that confirmed a worrying diagnosis, conduct disorder. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance with the serenity of someone who knew they were merely reaping what they had patiently sown. I didn't need to raise my voice even once. They dug the hole they fell into themselves. And the more they tried to justify themselves, the deeper they sank. Fights began between them. Vanessa accused Daniel of being weak and not having controlled the situation. Daniel blamed Vanessa for dragging him into this mess. Jason, left unsupervised, became even more aggressive, culminating in an incident at school that resulted in his suspension. The family that had seemed so united against me was now in ruins, imploding from within. When their deadline to vacate the house came, they tried to negotiate. Vanessa appeared with a look of anger and desperation. We can return everything we took. We can even get Jason help. But drop the lawsuit, Ellie, for God's sake. I simply replied calmly. Promises mean nothing without trust, and you've destroyed that. 2 months later, they left the house. They took only what was truly theirs, which wasn't much. I was left with the keys in my hands and a bittersweet feeling. The victory had a strong taste, but also a weight. I had achieved justice, but at an irreversible cost. My relationship with my own son and grandson. Still, I knew it was necessary, because allowing them to continue would mean giving away my dignity. And dignity, I learned the hard way, is non-negotiable. When the house finally fell silent, a true silence, not the tense one that had plagued me for so long, I felt as if I were breathing for the first time in months. I looked at each room, each object that had survived that dark period, and decided I wouldn't allow my memories to be trapped in pain. I reorganized everything. I replanted the garden Vanessa had neglected. I breathed new life into the space they'd tried to turn into a battlefield. With the help of Martha and Beatrice, the Second Chances Foundation gained momentum. It was no longer just a symbol of my revenge. It became a living project capable of changing destinies. Young victims of bullying received support. Abandoned elderly people found a network of support. Each scholarship awarded was like a grain of hope planted in fertile soil. It was my way of transforming the poison they gave me into medicine for others. The lectures came naturally. Former university colleagues invited me to speak about family abuse and the importance of maintaining autonomy in old age. At first, I was nervous. I thought my voice would tremble, that the pain would still be too fresh. But the moment I stepped into the auditorium and saw the attentive faces, I realized that every tear I'd shed beforehand had prepared me for that moment. I was no longer just a victim. I was a survivor with a powerful message. In his lectures, he spoke frankly. He explained how abuse doesn't always come from strangers, but often from those closest to him. He explained how small signs, out-of-place objects, suspicious conversations, calculated glances can be the beginning of something much bigger. And above all, he demonstrated that it's never too late to regain control. Seeing that mix of shock and relief in people's eyes gave me the strength to keep going. At the same time, I rebuilt my personal routine. I resumed my old hobbies, resumed writing my memoirs, and reconnected with friends Vanessa had alienated with her lies. Visits to my support network became moments of genuine joy. It was a new family, chosen for affinity, respect, and true affection, not just blood ties. Daniel eventually began to show signs of remorse. He sent timid letters, trying to justify his actions, blaming fear, pressure, or Vanessa's influence. I read them but didn't respond immediately. I knew that forgiveness, if it were to come, would have to be built with actions, not just words. Jason, for his part, entered an intensive therapy program. I heard he was beginning to make small progress, but I kept my distance. It wasn't yet time for a reunion. The house, once filled with pain, became a refuge. One of the bedrooms became my writing studio, another a library for students receiving foundation scholarships. The walls that had witnessed betrayals now hosted laughter, inspiring conversations, and new stories. There, I realized that rebuilding isn't just about redoing what was destroyed, but about creating something completely new with renewed purpose. And looking back at everything that had happened, I understood that my story wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. Reclaiming my autonomy, my voice, my ability to choose who deserved to stay in my life, and, above all, leaving a legacy that was greater than the pain that brought me there. Months later, life had a different rhythm. The foundation was thriving, the lectures were multiplying, and I no longer felt the weight of loneliness. Still, there were moments when the memory of what had happened visited me, not with sadness, but with a strange serenity. I knew that not all wounds heal completely, but I learned to live with the scars without letting them define me. Daniel began to appear discreetly at my lectures. He would stand in the background, silent, as if he hadn't yet worked up the courage to approach me. One day, after an event, he waited until the room was empty before simply saying to me, "I'm trying to be better, Mom. For myself, for Jason. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm trying. It was the first time I felt that perhaps one day there would be room for real dialogue. Jason, under the guidance of his therapists, wrote a letter. His words were mechanical, likely dictated in controlled sessions. I know I hurt you. I'm learning to understand why I did it. I still don't feel the way I should, but I'm trying to change. It wasn't the apology any grandmother would dream of receiving, but it was a start. And sometimes, starting is all we can hope for. I looked at that letter and thought about how life is made of choices and consequences. We don't always have control over what's done to us, but we can always choose what to do with what we've been given. I chose not to be the eternal victim. I chose to rewrite my own story, even if it meant losing the one who, by blood ties, should have been by my side. Little by little, I understood that family isn't just about those who share the same last name, but about those who choose to be present with true love. Beatrice, Martha, George, they became part of the family I truly needed. Together, we created something greater than any revenge, a legacy of hope for those who felt they had no way out. Today, as I walk through my renewed garden, I see flowers sprouting where once there were only weeds, and I remember that life is like that too. Sometimes you have to clear away what's rotten to make room for the new. Sometimes you have to say enough to make things bloom again. I haven't reconciled everything. I haven't transformed the past into something beautiful, but I have transformed the future into something better. And that, for me, is more than enough. Because in the end, the greatest victory isn't tearing down those who hurt us, but rising up in a way they never expected. And you? Have you ever thought about which parts of your life are waiting to be rewritten? Stories like mine show that sometimes the greatest strength is born at the very moment when others try to break us. It's not always easy to see a way out when everything around us seems like a conspiracy and abandonment. But there is always a path to regaining dignity. Sometimes it begins silently, with small steps that no one sees. But that change everything. If you've ever felt undervalued, betrayed, or treated like a burden, know that you're not alone. There is support, there is justice, and most importantly, there's a chance to start over, even when all seems lost. And perhaps, like me, you'll discover that you're much stronger than you imagined. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something that made you doubt who was truly there for you? Have you ever had to choose yourself, even if it meant walking away from the people who should love you? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters and can help others going through the same thing. And don't forget, if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this. Here you'll always find narratives that inspire, move, and remind us that life can always be rewritten. Stories like this show us that it's never too late to turn things around and regain what's rightfully ours: our dignity, our voice, and the freedom to choose who deserves to be by our side. If you were moved by this narrative, leave a comment and share your experiences. Your story could be the inspiration someone needs today. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. This way, you won't miss any of the upcoming stories that bring deep reflections, life lessons, and, who knows, maybe even that strength you never imagined you had.